In this video, we're going to go ahead and learn about JavaScript objects. So to get started, what we can do is go ahead and go into your project folder. If you want to go into the 12-objects folder, and then the start subfolder, open up the main.js file, and then in your browser, if you can go ahead and open up the index.html page that's in the subfolder, you should see objects on the page. So we've talked about variables in JavaScript before, and so basically a variable is a container for us to store data values. So for example, we have var a, and we can set it equal to 5. So our variable a is used as a container to store this one particular value. And so this is often referred to as a simple value because this variable is only storing one value. So an object is another type of variable. However, it's unique because it can store many values. So in addition to having many values, objects can also have their own methods. And a method is basically a function that can be ran on this particular object. So one of the best ways to learn objects is if you can think about them as a real-life object. So for example, let's say on our website we allow users to log in and we store information about that user in a user profile. So this object could be information on our user. So to create an object, we use our variable keyword. So in this example, I'm going to use const, and I'm going to say user profile. And to create the object, we just assign it to, and so to create our object, we do an opening and closing curly brace. So now if we go ahead and do console.log and we do our user profile, we'll go ahead and save and refresh our page. You see that we get this curly brace and we see that it's an object in our developer console here. So as I mentioned, an object can have multiple values stored in it, and to do this, we need to add these values as properties to our object. So we can think of properties as attributes of our object. So for our user profile, we may have a first name. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to Joe. And then we could have a last name. I'm going to set this to Smith. And then we may have age. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to 20. So what's going on here is in our object, we're creating multiple properties, so first name, last name, and age. And for each of these properties, we're assigning a particular value to that property. So they're almost like a variable inside our variable, because we can store any value we want inside this property here. So if we go ahead and save and refresh our page, you'll see now we have this object, and it has all of the properties and the values that we assign to them inside this object. So, in order to add any value we want to our object, we need to write them as a name and value pair. And by that, I mean this is our name, so the name of our property, and we have to separate it by a colon, and then the value of our property, so 20. So we can write our properties like this, and it won't affect our object. However, the standard is usually to add a space, because it's a little bit cleaner and easier to read while we're looking at our code. In addition to this, you can also have all of your properties on one line of code, and this won't actually break your code either. However, it can be useful to break your object onto multiple lines, so it's a little bit easier to read. So in addition to referencing our object, we can also reference our object's properties directly, and we can do that in one of two ways. So the first is we can do user profile, and then we can do dot, and then we can do the name of our property. So I can go ahead and do first name, or I'm going to go ahead and copy this line here. You can go ahead and do a bracket followed by another bracket, and then you can write the name of your property as a string, and this will let you access that property as well. So go ahead and save and refresh. We should see that this property's value gets logged to our console, and you see it does. We get Joe. So as I mentioned before, you can also have methods on your object, and basically a method is an action that can be performed on your object, and methods are stored in properties as a function definition. So one example of a method is, let's say we want to go ahead and get our user's full name. So we could do this just by doing console.log user profile dot first name plus user profile dot last name. So if we go ahead and save, we should see that our first and last name are printed to our console. However, it would be nice if we can actually just call .full name on our user profile to get this information. So we could store these two strings together as another property, but that's problematic because if we ever want to update our user's name, we have to update multiple fields. Instead, we can add a method called full name, and then in this method, we can have a function that can be used to return the properties of our object. So we can go ahead and do return this dot first name plus, we'll go ahead and add a space between our first and last name, and we do this dot last name, and we'll go ahead and save. And then down here in our console log, let's go ahead and replace this with user profile dot full name. And we'll go ahead and save. Let's go ahead and refresh. And we didn't actually get our user's full name. And the reason for that is because since this method is a function, it's treated just like a function. So when we use our function name or our method name, we get the definition of that function. And to actually invoke our method, we need to use the open and closing parentheses. So if we go ahead and save and refresh, you'll see now Joe Smith is printed to our console. So one thing I do want to call out here is the word this. So this is a keyword in JavaScript that is used to refer to the object that it currently belongs to. So this has to do with scope in JavaScript, and we'll be discussing this later on in the course. But just so you know for right now, when we're inside an object in a method, if you use the keyword this, it's referring to the object itself. That's how we're able to get the first name and last name properties of our object because we're able to reference to the object itself.